A warm welcome again this morning as we open up Mental Health Festival Asia 2022. My name is Frank and I'll be your MC for this morning. Before we dive in, we're going to engage in some thoughtful dialogue around important issues, and we hence recognize that some content may be emotionally sensitive. If at any point you might feel uncomfortable with the issues and topics discussed, please feel free to reach out to your local mental health support here at the link shown below in the slides. Now, awareness of mental health and employee well-being has become part of the new workplace discourse, and the challenge is the bridge to effective action and policies continues to be sometimes lacking as employee turnover and burnout continue to be a challenge for many businesses today. This next session addresses exactly that, with some exciting research and discussion presented about how to make that change happen from global benefits leader and intellect partner Mercer. This will commence firstly as a 20 minutes presentation in the first half and transition to a rousing panel discussion joined by other business leaders in the second half. So for the first half, we are honored to have with us Narale, leader of Mercer's health and benefits business here in Singapore. Neil is an experienced people and benefits specialist, drawing from a demonstrated experience as a consultant in the human resources industry in both North America and Asia. He's passionate about employee well-being and creating a culture of purpose in the workplace. With that, I'd like to invite Neil here to share with us his thoughts about unlocking an effective employee well-being system.
Welcome to today's session. Today I'm going to speak about trends in wellness and how you unlock an effective employee well-being system. We're going to be speaking about two of our reports that we've recently released. First, our MMB Health on Demand report, and secondly, our Global Talent Trends Survey report. When we think about wellness, it's a topic that many executives talk about day to day. HR practitioners cannot have a discussion today without mentioning it once in a conversation. It's part and parcel of how you engage employees and how you keep employees healthy and happy. So I hope you find today's insights very helpful. So what exactly are we going to speak about today? Well, first, we're going to look at the landscape of wellness and why now, and why should every employer have a sense of urgency? What are we seeing the landscape evolving towards? Most organizations are on a spectrum, they're on a journey. Some are just starting, some are in the middle of that journey, and some are more developed. But what we're seeing is some common themes that we'd like to share with you today. Second, trends in wellness. As I mentioned, we have recently launched our Global Talent Trends Survey. We're going to share some of the insights, some of the trends, and what organizations are doing today. And where are we seeing organizations emerging towards? And thirdly, we're going to talk about working on wellness. And how as an employer do you show you care? How do you design an effective wellness program to really keep employees healthy and happy? So, the landscape of wellness, and why now, and why should every organization have a sense of urgency today? We recently released a survey called our Healthy Minds at Work. And this survey showed some interesting insights that I would like to share with you today. 4 insights. The first one, a risk area. We're seeing a blurring of lines between work and personal life. In fact, what we're seeing is 83% of organizations today are finding they're working more overtime, at least 3 times a week. And partly it's because they're bringing work back home. They're not able to delineate between work life and personal life. And as a result, it's causing stress, it's causing burnout. Second, a lack of control over how and when work is being done. 64% are just unable to adjust the order, how to prioritize their work, and the pace in which they deliver work. They're not able to take breaks at home. And even when they do feel they're taking a break at home, they're not really switching off. They're still switched on. We've entered into a very switched on culture where, again, the work life is entering into our home life. Now, it's not all grim. We are seeing some bright spots. What we're seeing is employees are feeling the need to have a stronger sense of community and collaboration. In fact, employees are feeling like their community is now widening beyond work life, including employees, including their coworkers, and including leaders and executives in the organization. The definition of community has changed as we know it today. and employees are encouragingly feeling a stronger sense of that community and collaboration at the workplace. In fact, 78% of them want to work and affiliate themselves with an organization that has that strong culture of collaboration. Next, and lastly, we're seeing employees reporting higher levels of psychological safety in the workplace. 82% actually want to find a workplace that they feel safe to work in, where they can openly speak up and they can seek assistance from their coworkers and leaders in the organization, and especially when they think of their mental health. Again, very encouraging to hear. And speaking of mental health, when we recently released our MMB Health on Demand report, one of the questions we asked was around average stress levels. And what we saw was globally, 50% of employees are feeling stressed every day when they come to work. That's 1 in 2. And unfortunately, 3 of the top surveyed countries were from Asia that had above global average stress levels. Those top 3 countries were India, China, and Singapore. And while India and China are not much of a surprise, given the ruling upper class and vast shadow economy, Singapore was a bit of an anomaly for us. And partly because maybe it's being fueled by the post-pandemic, where work life is coming into the home life, and people are grappling with hybrid work and really unable to de-stress and take breaks and really disconnect from their work life. And lastly, we're seeing the changing of the landscape of benefits as we know it today. 77% of employers are actively looking at reviewing their benefits policies. Now, one may say, well, that's partly high because over the last couple of years, there have been other priorities that executives and HR leaders have been consumed with, and perhaps only now they're getting to reviewing benefits policies. But when you look at the reasons, 90% are looking to review benefits policies because they want to attract and better retain top talent. And that's not new. 80% looking to improve their benefits or review their benefits because of employer branding. So providing a benefit policy that's unique, that represents their organization's identity. Again, not new. But what is new is number 3, results of employee surveys. 68% are looking at reviewing their benefits policy because they're listening to their employees. Results of employee surveys has come up in terms of reasons why employers now review benefits, which is extremely encouraging because employers want to hear what employees have to say about their benefits and their own well-being. And now trends in wellness. As I mentioned, we did recently release our Global Talent Trend Survey. What are companies doing today and where are we seeing them moving towards? Well, the first trend, systematic employee listening has become more common than ever. In fact, when we think of employee listening, it's almost fundamental to now designing an employee well-being program. And one may ask why employee listening is so important. Well, first, it builds trust. It builds support and psychological safety. Employees want to feel trusted. They want to work for an employer they feel loyal towards. They want to know that they're in a safe pair of hands when they come to work every day. Second, it sparks innovation, co-creation, and change. In fact, as we're moving more towards hybrid work, what we're seeing is many organizations reviewing their work environments. And what's encouraging is that 52% are co-creating with employees also in the involvement of co-creating a new workspace. And when we think of that, employees crave meaningful work. They want to be able to come to work with a sense of purpose. They want to feel more connected to their employer. They want to work for a responsible organization. They want to know what their employer stands for in terms of sustainability. And lastly, employee listening is important because it fosters community, collaboration, and a shared leadership. They feel in a safer pair of hands when they think of their wider community outside of family life, friends, and church groups and sporting groups. They think of now their coworkers as part of their overall community. And so our Global Talent Trend surveys show that 38% of organizations are now increasing employee listening efforts since last year. And that could mean in terms of more pulse surveys, more engagement surveys, employee listening sessions, executive leadership talks. We are seeing employee listening on the rise. And why is employee listening fundamental? Because ultimately it shows you, as an employer, you care about your employees. And today, caring employers are more important than ever. A caring employer shows that you care about an employee's well-being and you want them to be happier and healthier so that they are more productive and they're more energized when they come to the workplace. And what does a caring employer look like? What are some examples? Well, they're ones that help with managing employees' family responsibilities, habits and life goals, training and development, career progression. They support with mental health and resilience and potential relationship challenges. They practice a healthy and supportive environment, both physically, emotionally, socially in the workplace. They co-create by deriving innovation in the areas of potentially helping with addressing health and chronic conditions. They help find coordinated care, so access is convenient for their employees. And virtual healthcare for certain generations that feel more convenient to access healthcare that way. And what does this ultimately lead to? It ultimately leads to varied and valued benefits. Varied in a way that it actually touches your wider demographic and diverse workforce group, and valued in a way that you're listening to employees and giving them what they want and what they desire. And ultimately, a caring culture is really 4 points that an employer should bear in mind. First of all, meaningfully flexible. So thinking about benefits, again, that are valued and varied, so you touch a diverse workforce group, and you're touching different groups of employees within your organization. In fact, 28% today are looking at differentiated groups as they think about their health and well-being programs. It's supportive leadership. It's leadership that is human-centric, that can feel a level of care for their employees. In fact, 1 in 3 say that they want to work for an organization whose leadership is more human-centric. It's thoughtful communication. And what I mean by thoughtful communication, I don't mean over-communicating. I mean communication that's strategic, that touches employees. For example, nudging employees to access well-being. In fact, 84% are planning to implement some level of nudge communication. And lastly, affordable healthcare. Employees want to know that their employer is making healthcare affordable for their needs. In fact, employees are 2 times more likely to be advocates of the organization if they feel healthcare provided to them is affordable. And lastly, working on wellness. How do you show you care? As you listen to employees, you understand what they truly value, and you provide a structure in which you know that they feel that you care as an employer. Now, there is no silver bullet in designing a well-being program. It really does come down to really understanding your organization, where you are on the well-being spectrum, the diversity of your workforce, and understanding who you are as an organization in terms of your identity. But some items to keep in mind: supporting moments that matter. And again, that comes to listening to employees. What is it that matters to them? Is it certain life events? Is it stages in their career? Investing in a holistic wellness program. Wellness has come a long way over the last 10 to 15 years. We started with physical wellness, moved to nutrition, to emotional, to mental now, and potentially financial wellness in the future. So really making sure that your wellness program is holistic enough to touch your employees in various different ways. Delivering benefits that are equitable. Thinking about the different groups of employees within your organization. For example, paternity and maternity benefits. Are they provided equitably between men and women? Enabling digital access to healthcare. So thinking for millennials and Gen Zs, and how do they access healthcare? What is most convenient and comfortable for them? And lastly, providing benefits that are valued and varied, so that employees feel that they're being listened to, and the benefits are varied enough so that it touches your different groups and diversity of your workforce. And lastly, we're seeing organizations now re-looking at their employee value proposition, especially in the new world of work that we live in. In fact, 43% of executives are actively reevaluating their employee value proposition through employee listening. Listening to their employees, understanding how they're feeling about the new world of work, hybrid working, for example, and really understanding what works for them. In fact, when you ask executives, what's the number 1 reason why you invest in well-being? Their response is to have a healthier and happier workforce, because they recognize it leads to a more productive, a more healthier, happier, and engaged team. And 42% of HR leaders are actively looking to individualize benefits for different working groups. They recognize that diversity matters. Understanding the different groups of employees in their organization is imperative in designing appropriate well-being program. 2 interesting statistics from our Global Talent Trends survey. First, Gen Zs felt that remote work was actually much more stressful and it had a much more negative impact on them. Second, women are likely to say their work-life balance has significantly deteriorated since the pandemic. So as you think about the new world of work, thinking about the different working groups like your Gen Zs of women and how you adapt your employee value proposition accordingly will be key and fundamental. And finally, takeaways. How can you deliver on total well-being? First, listening to your employees. We're seeing listening on the rise encouragingly, but there's still work to be done. Listening to employees is fundamental to developing a holistic well-being program, understanding their needs, what they value, co-creating with your employees. Secondly, linking employee well-being to what your employees value. Again, that goes back to employee listening, but more importantly, to show that you care. Now, many employers are on a spectrum and they're on a journey for employee well-being, and it will be different for every organization in terms of what they implement. Implementing employee well-being is about your unique identity. It is about understanding your employees and your workforce, your culture of your organization. And lastly, ensure your total well-being program is inclusive. Truly understand the different groups of employees that exist within your organization. Understand the makeup of your diversity through gender mix, demographic mix, ethnic mix, socioeconomic risk, for example, so that your total well-being program is truly inclusive and diverse. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed today's session.
For the audience and panelists alike, please make yourselves comfortable here as we move into the next part of today's session. Joining Neil for our panel discussion now will be Min Ng. Min is General Manager at the Secret Little Agency, or TSLA for short. They'll be breaking down how their businesses are approaching and unlocking effective employee well-being solutions. Now, since starting her career in 2010, Min fell in love with everything creative and has built a 12-year-long career focused on transforming and developing a robust, creative partnership with clients. Joining TSLA in 2015, her growth has spanned roles from head of talent to most recently general manager, leading the agency's culture, commercials, and operations. Moderating this panel will be Jonathan Cuevas, the Global Commercial Director at Intellect. With 2 decades of experience in the industry, he has created health solutions, insurance products, and employee benefits plans. Over to you, Jonas.
Thanks, Frank. Well, it's a pleasure being here hosting you, Neil, Min. So Min, with you, a great client with us, collaborating together, doing a lot of things. So now expanding with 5 markets in the region, so it's amazing. Thank you for that. And Neil, also all the collaboration that we are doing together as a partners, doing a lot of different things, solving problems with mutual clients. Thank you again for being here. So it's a pleasure. But well, just to start now with a icebreaker question. So I know that you have been using Intellect app, so and all our services. So probably Min, for you, what is the most or your favorite feature or service, and why? Or probably some colleague that you have heard. So what do you think about Intellect app?
I have more than one favorite. I use the rescue sessions a lot, just because it's on the go. It really helps me, kind of get some of the thinking, and the thoughts out of my brain, as I say, like go back home, on the way back home. And the learning paths are super useful because I think they act almost like a friend to you, There are various things that I use it for, and I love that it goes beyond just the typical things that you associate with mental health, but it goes into things like food, sleep, and all of that. So that's really, really great. And actually, for everyone in the company, I think Intellect, more than just kind of its function and features, has really become that platform and conduit for us to discuss mental health, which is a great thing for the company.
For sharing that. And Neil, what about you?
So one of our largest clients, mutual clients that we work together with, telco company, I think what was very encouraging for me was when we implemented your solution, there was a lot of excitement. I mean, for one, the digital connectivity. They have a very young workforce. For them, everything and everybody accesses solutions on their mobile phone. And for them to get mental health support on their mobile phone and get that level of connection, I think was really, really insightful. And for me, just to see the launch, be part of the launch, I think there's a lot more to come down the road, but for me, that was the one thing and that one client experience that very memorable for me.
No, perfect. And well, now that you are saying this launching, because I remember with that client, we were part of the Wellbeing program they launched. So I just read about the Mercer survey where they say that 19% of the participants, 14,000 participants, you need to tell us how do that. 14,000, it's a lot of people answering this survey. But this 19% of people said that the employer feel that the employer take care about health and well-being. So obviously you're familiar with these numbers. So what do you think this could affect the workplace for all the companies? So what do you think about this?
Well, I guess first of all, it's a very grim statistic that only 19% of employees feel their employers care about them. And I think, when we sort of unpack that, and it reminds me of another statistic, 40% of millennials today want to work for an employer whose values align to their values, and 10% would take a pay cut to work for those employers. And why that's a very important, telling statistic is that employees now care about what the employers think. They care about what they think about social issues, climate change, whether organizations, what they're doing about going carbon neutral in the future, and they care about what the employers are doing about their own well-being. And so we see that fairly fundamental now, and care is a big part of why employees choose organizations they want to be affiliated with. It reminds me of a great story. During the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009, most organizations were restructuring and doing massive layoffs. Honeywell, one company, decided to do something different. Their CEO decided to, instead of laying off employees to cut costs, to trade layoffs for furloughs. So what that effectively means is if everybody could voluntarily give up some days, unpaid, so unpaid leave of absences, and if they could generate enough savings through enough unpaid leave of absences, they effectively would have to lay off nobody in the organization. And they were one of the few organizations in the US that actually did not do any layoffs during the great financial crisis. And what was very telling about that is the loyalty it created in the organization. Employees actually wanted to work for Honeywell, and we did see attrition levels in the organization actually reduce post the great financial crisis. So there's a lot that can be done when you think of employee care, when an employer thinks of how they design well-being programs.
It's a great example. But now here in this time in Asia, with all these markets that you are opening, so what about you? What is how this well-being impact in the workplace? Probably more for talent retention to attraction talent as well. So what do you think about that, Min?
So yeah, it's a really sad statistic. I think if you all know, the talent war is real, and it's a really hard battle. Talent's really scarce, and I think the fight for great talent is one that all employers are now faced with. And increasingly, it's not just about the work that you're doing, it's not just about the managers themselves. It really is a holistic, plethora of different factors that come into play when employees are kind of evaluating, which job to take. It's super important, and I think we've seen that, really evident. Even when I'm talking to kind of potential candidates, they're asking questions around what is the culture like? What do you do for your kind of employees' well-being? What are the different programs that you have? And increasingly, these questions are now then also reflected into things like what we put into employment contracts. They're not just looking for a number of leave days, they're not just looking at the salary, they are really looking at what you are doing as an employer tangibly for kind of mental health, and general kind of well-being. So yeah, it's super important. And I'm sure all of you have heard of the phenomenon of quiet quitting. And I really do think that also comes from the fact that, when employees feel like the employers are not doing much for me, they don't really care, why should I care? So I think, in what we do at TSLA, we've placed a huge emphasis around understanding what employees need and want through kind of regular listening, through a lot of one-on-one check-ins, because these things evolve, these things change, day by day, yeah. And being able to kind of make policies and also introduce programs and even, partnering with Intellect to be able to kind of accommodate that, evolve our needs along the way, that's super important. Yeah.
Oh yes, I think that is very, very important. And now that you are saying just well-being, probably just getting in mental health. So I have heard as well, and what is a result from Mercer, that more than 30% of the companies in the same survey, they are in this year, they are trying to start a mental health strategy, so implement it. So probably Neil, as a consultant part, or partner, no? What is exactly what you will recommend to these companies to probably assess what is the points they need to check before implementing a mental health strategy?
So I think, first of all, there's no silver bullet. And mental well-being, as much as we are seeing executives now, even at that level, acknowledging that something needs to be done in their organization, that they do need to care about employee well-being for their employees' health, happiness. Ultimately, healthy and happy employees means more productive, more employees that are brand ambassadors that want to work for the organization. So I think they all recognize the need to invest in employee well-being, but where to start? And it is a spectrum. Some are just getting started, some have put in well-being programs in place, and others very well established. But more importantly, it's about understanding your workforce and really understanding the diversity of the workforce, the gender diversity, the ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and understanding the culture of your own organization. And it could mean that two very similar organizations that may consider themselves peers having very different well-being programs. And as an insurance practitioner, we typically love benchmarking. You can't benchmark employee well-being programs. They ought to fit your organization for what your employees need and want. And so what we typically tell clients that we work with is start with moments that matter. Really determine what matters to your employees, and that comes from employee listening. That comes from listening to them and having them co-create the well-being programs, as opposed to doing it in a vacuum. Yes, cost is important. Yes, understanding what works within the organization is important, but employee listening's got to be fundamental.
And ROI as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I mean, you went through this process like a few years ago when you were deciding to partner with Intellect. So now for those companies that probably are thinking to partner with Intellect, so what would you advise to them?
Yeah, I would say don't just think about the launch of it, think about it from a long-term perspective. The implementation, the engagements along the way are super critical to the success of something like that. And I think really creating your own program, your way of communication to your employees in understanding the culture of them, the company is super important. Then you partner, people like Intellect to be able to kind of customize some of these messages. And the other thing that I would say that has been really tremendously important is the leadership team in different organizations. And I think it's not just about presenting the pros and cons, the value, and just in terms of dollar and figures. It really did take a big kind of push around every single senior leader understanding why it is important to do something like that. Not just because, it's gonna lower retention. It really did kind of will help if all your senior leaders truly understand the benefits of having something like this, and they themselves believing, that mental wellness is important, almost looking inwardly, because I think actions speak louder than words, and I really believe in leading by example. So a lot of things that when we launched our own kind of employee benefits and kind of mental health program, was really to kind of share personal examples of how kind of mental health and different episodes affected myself, through the pandemic. And I think that really helped people understand, number one, this is a safe space to talk about these things. Number two, it is all human, for us to feel these things and want to do something about it. So that was really critical. For us, it's a human business. So I think these were the really important factors, yeah.
Great, I think we need to normalize these type of topics, and reduce the stigma and everything that we have heard. Now that we just discussed before starting the panel, so about the hybrid model, that a big percentage of people, of our employees, are working from home. So how do you think is the best way to address this mental health strategy for those employees that probably are not in the company? Because before it was a little easier because we had all the employees in one place. Probably we can do some activities. We can just run some specific, talks, chats, whatever. So right now, I mean, in your case, how do you think is the best way to address mental health with this hybrid model?
Yeah, so it's to mirror the hybrid model. So that's exactly what we're doing. We do for people who are working from home, the webinars, of different types of topics really help. And these webinars are super engaging, even though they're not in person, because I think it also helps people kind of feel safe, talking and kind of raising questions about these things when they're not in person. But that all of that has to be also complemented by the in-person interactions that you have. And for us, it really is, training our managers, training the leaders to be able to have these conversations one-on-one in these intimate settings, to ask questions beyond work, beyond performance, to the real, how are you, what is on your mind, how are you feeling, and being able to help employees understand that it is okay to talk about these things because the lines between work and life, they're blurred. Your life is work and work is life. And the way you're feeling about anything that's happening at home, or with any relationships will impact, what you do at work as well. So I think that's super important. And I think being hybrid actually has been great for productivity. But there are many different ways we can still, run a really successful kind of mental health and wellness program, in a hybrid mode.
Oh, sure. And we knew that this will happen. Not with the pandemic, it probably was like quicker. But Neil, I'm sure for you, some companies or clients ask exactly this same question. So with a hybrid model, people working from home, how can we improve the well-being, the mental health? So what is the suggestions that you do?
So I think most organizations that we work with right now are still grappling with the definition of hybrid, and some I'd say shying away from actually defining it because they themselves don't know. So some perhaps say it's a couple of days in the office, some say maybe coming into the office when you want, and some have just completely left it inflexible or completely flexible. Sorry. I think what it means is that it is confusing for employees, and that in itself can cause some stress, and sometimes solutions aren't necessarily built for the environment that you're trying to create because they haven't defined the environment. What we're trying to do with most of our clients is first define what does hybrid mean and be very clear to employees. What are the expectations? And then solutions like mental health and well-being support can be addressed. But I do agree with you, Min, in terms of really talking the talk and really making sure that you lead by examples. The other thing that we are showcasing with employers is the leaderships being advocates and really taking a part. And so I loved your quitting quietly. The other saying that we have is leaving loudly. And so as leaders and executives in organizations, when they are, for example, shutting off for the evening, saying, I'm shutting off, I'm going to be having dinner with my family now, and letting employees know it's okay for you to shut off too. In fact, it's natural and it's normal for you to shut off too. And so we love the leaving loudly concept, whether it's in the office or on Zoom. And I think leaders need to walk the walk at the end of the day. Solutions are great, defining hybrid is great, but ultimately it's about leaders being advocates of the organization.
I think it's great advices. And now I think before, you mentioned around this employee value proposition, no? This complete offering that we can offer to the employees or to attract talent. So, and Neil, you also mentioned in the last presentation, I think in the last slide or one of the last, where compensations and benefits is the base, but also we have less tangible benefits. Yeah. So, in your experience, this well-being is taking an important part of this value proposition, or what other benefits we can add in this employee value proposition?
Yeah. So I think it's very encouraging now that we're seeing HR leaders and executives prioritizing employee well-being as, in fact, a higher layer above compensation and benefits, and seeing it as if it deserves kind of its own spotlight. What's also encouraging is we're seeing many organizations now appointing a chief well-being officer outside from a chief HR officer. So seeing, wow, employee well-being and employees being happy and healthy in our organization is truly going to be more meaningful for us in terms of brand, in terms of productivity, in terms of loyalty. And so what we're seeing is that investment now being put forward. And we're actually seeing organizations less fixated now on ROI. I think those were the initial days when you make any investment, you say, what return am I getting? But actually saying, you know what, at the end of the day, you can't necessarily put a tangible ROI, but really we're doing this because we know we believe in it and believe it's part of our culture. It's no different than a code of conduct. An employer doesn't ever put an ROI on a code of conduct. They know it because that's the values of the organization that they want to communicate to employees. We see well-being very similar. And we're seeing that approach changing very quickly in time, especially as we're emerging out of the pandemic.
Oh, sure. And Min, what is your point of view on this?
I think the idea of equitable and fair is something that I grapple with. I think some people think that fair or having benefits across the board means you have to do the same for each and every employee. I grapple with that. I feel like it shouldn't be that way. The truth is every employee is unique in terms of kind of where they come from, the age, the life stage they're in. And I do think that, if we want to look at that in totality, it is that there needs to be a level of kind of customization almost, and being able to look at every employee or groups of employees and think about what are the different benefits and well-being programs that will best serve the needs of that group of employees. I think it's tricky because, of course, leaders and HR teams have a lot to do as is. But I think it's actually a super important component in looking at kind of employees' well-being, looking forward. And I do think that there is a way to be able to grapple with that, and be able to implement, policies and benefits in a way that is easily understood, by everybody. They understand why you're doing this, and they also understand why that level of kind of customization and different types of benefits are important for different groups of people. I think more and more when you have younger people entering the workforce, they are vastly different from some of us. They are vastly different. They have different needs. The way they look at life and work is also very different from generation to generation. And that in itself is just one way of cutting it. There's so many different ways of cutting it. But yeah, that's what I think.
So when we are doing this type of offering to some clients, they have a different generations, different backgrounds. So trying to offer as much as possible, but in a scalable way. Yeah. So I think it's very important, and we're trying to do that as well in all the Intellect services. But just ending on this panel. So Neil, what will be 2 or 3 recommendations for the HR leaders to improve well-being in general, not just mental health, well-being? What would you say or suggest to the HR leaders?
Yeah, so I think, maybe where I see the future of well-being going, one, I think we should be aware, post-pandemic. If anything we've learned over the last few years, none of us could have predicted we'd be ever accepting hybrid work as something that we'd consider normal, and here we are today. And so we should expect to see newer risks emerging in the future. And some of these risks won't be necessarily new risks, but risks that we are now openly willing to speak about with our employees, and employees are willing to acknowledge that this is an area that I need help in. Like mental health is another great example. 3-4 years ago, this was a concept that we were all uncomfortable speaking about. And today, it's encouraging to even see CEOs being very open that they need to take a sabbatical, they need a break. We're all human beings at the end of the day. So I think as HR leaders, my first tip would be aware of newer risks that may be emerging in the organization. Part of that might mean having good people managers, rethinking about who your people managers are in the organization. It's interesting when I think about our people managers over the last 10, 15 years that used to work with me, perhaps their roles were more catered towards making sure employees met their KPIs. They were in the office. They could count the head count. They were truly doing their job. And dare I say, they were cracking the whip a bit. Today, that is not the idea of what I would think an effective people manager is. An effective people manager is someone who cares about the employee's well-being, who cares about the employee's training and development, learning opportunities, their career trajectory. And so the role of people manager is changing quite vastly. And so you need good people managers who are listening to their employees, who employees feel they can be open with, and perhaps if there's those newer risks emerging, they can talk to them about. The second thing I would say is, which I think is very encouraging, is I think as HR leaders that we need to stop accepting toxic work cultures. In fact, toxic work cultures should not be tolerated. I think they're the thing of the past where leaders and people managers and coworkers could talk down to employees. In fact, I think one of the things that mental well-being has actually helped is encourage employees to speak up, to talk about perhaps challenges they're facing in the office. And so I do think it's very positive to see, and we're already seeing toxic work cultures reducing in time. And as HR leaders, my tip is to absolutely not tolerate it.
Great advices. And probably for you, what you have done, or probably as well, if you can just share some experiences or what you recommend for some companies to improve this well-being.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Having a safe space for people to be able to speak up is super important. And I think that really comes from, like you say, calling out toxic work, behaviors and cultures. But at the same time, also things like really encouraging people to be authentically themselves at work is super important. I think more and more, you don't have a work self and a real self. You should be bringing your whole self to work. And I think that's the way people like to connect and be able to build meaningful relationships. But to do that, it does mean that leaders, it does mean that actually even your peers need to really actively cultivate that culture of safe space for speaking up and being able to talk about some of these things that may not be things that we used to talk about in the past. And I think secondly, what's really important again is kind of leading by example. And I do think that leaders who show vulnerability, who are able and are confident to be able to show the sides of themselves that expose, things that they are thinking about that may not be traditionally linked with what a strong leader should be saying is super important, because I do think that signals to everybody that it is okay to talk about these things, but at the same time, it's a huge and important critical thing, that is important to all of us, as leaders. And I think finally, employee listening is something that you just can't stop doing. If you need to do this as regular as every quarter, you have to do it. And that can come in the form of formal surveys that you do. That can also come in the form of kind of one-on-one check-ins where you are regularly asking people some of these questions and getting feedback around what's working, what's not working, how people are feeling, as an entire organization, as different teams. So then you'll be able to kind of evolve, change, pivot any policies and any kind of programs as you need to along the way. A lot of people think that, I look at a program, I sign up, I launch something, and that's it. I've done my part. But the truth is, it's not so simple. It really is, having that regular feedback to be able to understand and diagnose what's wrong, and be able to kind of pivot along the way.
Perfect. It was great having you here. I think these experiences and advices, it's very, very good for all the audience. Thank you very much for this. And I hope that all the audience can continue joining the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Bye.